Okay, good morning everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Welcome to day 3 of this conference. It's been an amazing 2 days, isn't it? We're going to have more of the same today. It's got a very promising program, so we're looking forward to that. And we'll start off with a really great plenary this morning with 3 speakers. We'll first up have Ilse Jolkanen and Lars Ugehoy, and then we'll have Timothy Sim as our second plenary. So we're looking forward to that. The process will be the same as we've done the previous 2 days, so we'll introduce Ilse and Lars first, and then they'll speak for about 30 minutes before we'll introduce Tim for the same period. We'll get them to respond to each other's presentations, and then we'll open the floor. And we have a microphone that will go around so we can get some dialogue going. We're waiting for the last few people to come in, and then we'll hand over without a lot of introductions, as we've been doing, hand over to Ilse and Lars. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And Irvin, actually, the reason why we have this kind of talk or dialogue is that Irvin asked us, could you do a Nordic dance? Well, we decided not to do a Nordic dance, but a kind of Nordic dialogue. But it's very difficult to just to have a dialogue. So we actually have a written down manuscript. So we won't get we didn't get a Tony Award the other day on Sunday. We won't have any slides, but we will have the lights. So you can see the city while we're talking. So, let's get started.
Let's get started, yes. And I'll start by asking, what is a Nordic perspective?
That's our perspective, because we're Nordic.
Okay, but is that different from other perspectives?
Yes, because we are very special.
Even in New York?
Ah, you got a point. We're not that special.
I've been thinking about the Nordic perspective, and it seems it's nice to hear people coming to this conference to New York and say that, oh, I thought this was just a Nordic perspective that I have, but now I hear people from all over the world talking about the same issues. So it seems to be a global perspective, perhaps, that we have.
Yeah, but let's keep the headline to make Irvin happy, at least, and to end up by saying this is really a global perspective. Will that make you happy?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a deal. Okay, we're happy to be invited here to talk about practice research as a negotiated process in a Nordic perspective. Leaning against the title of the conference, you could say that we will be talking about the bridge over troubled water, because practice research processes are not rose-red, they are troubled water.
Do you know, Lars, I like the metaphor of troubled water, because it says something about the complexities we are involved in when doing practice research. We involve a lot of stakeholders, and this can be really stirring. But I think, is the real trouble, in fact, the bridge? All too often we think that just by collaborating and cooperating professionally we can and must balance everything. So are we just bridging over troubled water?
I don't know. I think I would like to formulate it like this. Practice research is a meeting point between practice and research, where both common understandings, different interests, and powerful positions are to collaborate. Although we have a joint goal for establishing knowledge-based social work through collaboration, there are in between the participants both culturally, professional differences, not only because practice and research are organized and act differently, but also because they have a different perception of what knowledge is and how knowledge is established. And these differences in positions cannot be hidden, they cannot be overlooked. On the contrary, I think they have to be clarified and used. So I think you're right, bridges might be a problem. So instead of keep on being the constructors as the researchers, we probably just have to jump into the troubled water together with the partners. And in that way, not only collaborate, but also negotiate. Negotiation becomes a central part of developing collaborative research initiatives between the participants if we want to make it possible both to receive and to give away knowledge.
Yeah. There's been a lot of discussions about how to define practice research, and we have written a bit about it. And one could say that practice research in social work is not only a question of studying how things have evolved and how they work, but also how they can be improved and under what conditions in order to ensure improvements. And these improvements impact, in fact, the space, that is, the affected actors and their networks, which also can be rather stirring. So, and another point is that the question of carrying out, it's a question of carrying out rigorous and worthwhile research, and when making sure that the outcomes are relevant in and for practice, we should aim at the same time at expanding, challenging and promoting general knowledge. Thinking about these definitions, I think it's important to broaden the question also of practice research also to the political dimensions in social work. There's been a lot of talk about clinical social work, but I think that in a Nordic perspective, at least, we have to include also the political dimensions in it. In fact, policy and politics is always present in social work, and this makes the negotiations even more difficult. And still, by strengthening these relational and organizational linkage between research and practice, I think that the relevance of research may transcend the process of generalizing and disseminating research findings. Practice research results may, in fact, have more impact than just local impact. And I think this is often forgotten.
Yeah, and I mean, what you say really turns on the tricky part of how to find a foundation for establishing this negotiation between the partners, because they must hold on to some of their central interests, while at the same time they have to be interested in learning from the other partners. In this way, all partners must accept to be disturbed in their traditional understandings, to exchange perspectives, and to accept to work with otherness and othering as a positive and a challenging part of the collaboration.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A Dutch researcher, Luc Boulians, who in fact is in planning theory and not in social work, talks about the need to take planners and decision makers out of their comfort zones, to challenge conventional wisdom and to look at the prospects of breaking out the box. He's in fact talking about a radical turn around in planners' view. He says that we should go more in the direction of outside inward instead of inside out. And I know this sounds awkward.
Not only awkward, it sounds dangerous.
Well, it's not. In fact, also Helga Novotny addresses the issue in her article on transdisciplinarity and states that the collaborative and co-productive knowledge production process is set out in a process of communication between different stakeholders. But that there is a risk if the problem is not formulated outside that group. Because until you come to an agreement about what the problem is, which doesn't mean that we all have the same opinion of the problem, but end up and how we could carry out the research in fact cannot begin. So the crucial issue is how we set out the process. Do we start by working in close and convenient circles, and then open up to have some representatives from outside to be included in our research work and research process? Or do we set up to look for how things are problematized differently through different perspectives, and then this affects the way we start to study our issues?
Yeah, I think it's a major challenge for research to step down from the ivory tower to a more equal partnership in social work research, as well as it's a challenge for practice to take some steps down from up into the ivory tower, to be interested in and have respect for positions, methods, theories, perspectives within the research, to change positions and to change their views, while researchers in practice research process, according to the Salisbury Statement, which has been mentioned several times, have to be practice-minded, meaning interested in where social work actually takes place and in how social work is understood and practiced from a social worker perspective. And the practitioner has to be research-minded, which is to be challenged by the research approach and to be open for critique.
Yeah, and I think we took this step further in the Helsinki Statement, that practice research includes a dialogue with those who are involved in the study, with other researchers, with decision makers, as well as with other central actors in the field. In contrast to the traditional research approaches guided only by academic norms, practice research, using both practitioner and researcher frameworks, are discussed and evaluated by a number of partners, including lay people. This process takes place in public spheres and involves an interaction between many actors, each of whom represents different interests and contributes the variety of competencies and attitudes also.
Yeah, now I think this way of understanding negotiation could be seen as a parallel to the Danish researchers Lauesen and Steger's perception of learning processes involving what they call disturbing feedback, or as said by Cochrane, Smith and Lyle, to be disturbed in a constructive way. And I would compare the negotiation process with a learning process. So if a learning process or learning processes are to focus on the possibility of change and development in everyday actions, it must be disturbed, it must be critical towards everyday practice, as well as it has to be disturbing to traditional research practice. So the negotiation or the process in practice research rather will be focusing on disturbance than consensus.
Okay.
And the knowledge coming out of the negotiation will challenge traditions, understandings, both within practice and within research, and it will challenge collaboration skills, as both partners will not only meet the usual, well, not the usual suspects, but the usual partners, but also alien partners with different interests, different understandings, and different goals.
Yeah, it's funny, because that's actually my point too. We started arguing about that, and Lars tried to put me saying that I don't agree or something like that, because we need to also negotiate, you know, we cannot have always the same opinions, but in fact I do agree. But I use different concepts for it. I have been intrigued by the French researcher Michel Calhoun, who points out that the first thing that we need to do is to establish careful initial analysis of the problematics at focus. And another critical issue is that we need to identify possible stakeholders and actors who have an interest and are ready to invest in common practice opportunities and possibilities. So the process involves deliberately inviting different actors to participate and encourages, in fact, debate from the outset. Bruno Latour, a French sociologist, reminds us that the ideas are spread by people who are interested in them, in the idea. Therefore, we need to analyze how actors react and act with these research and development contexts when it comes to disseminating and adopting the ideas. The etymology of the word interest justifies its choice. To be interested is to be in between, to be interposed. And during the problematization, actors join forces in order to attain a certain goal. We have been trying out this approach of a careful initial analysis of the problematics when studying youth issues at the Matilda Brede Institute, our practice institute arena. We started the process by an initial analysis of the problematic that the different factors, actors and key persons experience when dealing with troubled youth, or youth that seems to fall out of the system. And we had a lot of discussions, initial discussions with about 50 people. And after that, challenges these stories with persons in leading positions. For instance, a careful analysis came into finding key areas of concern that all the actors, these 50 actors that are involved in dealing with youth issues, is that, for instance, that service models and the transitions, young people's difficulties in being connected to the institutions and have, in a way, have loose bonds. The urge to find low threshold solutions, the lack of social in medical and school settings, and defining the risk group, or who are the invisible young people that we are talking about. And what we are now in a position where we will really start the final round table discussions on how to go about perhaps changing, looking for different answers, and perhaps also doing more case studies, doing more studies to do that. And that we do in round table practices. So we are just starting this, but one could say that the problematization describes a system of alliances or associations between different actors, and thereby identifying defining the identity of the process of what they and we all want in these issues.
Yeah, and I think this and your example will underline that different interests and possible contradictions will not prevent research and practice to connect. My experience is that practice research in social work needs to and will develop and connect both out of contradictions and out of an understanding that the collaboration is needed to reach the point of securing own characteristics and at the same time being able to respect and understand the other partners. They must negotiate, but they must, as a part of the negotiation, they all also have to struggle. And that could be, my experience is that could be struggling about the research question. I mean, social work have problems they would like to investigate, and we as researchers try to come up with research questions, and it's not that easy when you meet and are going to collaborate to find out to connect the understand the problem in practice together with the way that we kind of create a research question. And we have to struggle, negotiate and struggle. We have to struggle and negotiate about who are we going to interview? Are we going to do interviews? Are we going to do observations? What kind of research, what kind of methods are we using? And who will the informants be? Like we had, in one of our collaborations, the practice wanted the informant to be someone they had a good relationship with, like service users, and we would like to have just a sample of service users. And we had to fight about that, or struggle about it, negotiate about it. And the struggle could also be about how do we do the analysis? How do we, what kind of theories are going to be used? And I mean, all the way through we have to negotiate, to struggle, to have some small fightings about the collaboration. And which leads me to return to the notion of othering, which I mentioned earlier. The interesting thing about othering, at least when we are talking about practice research, I know it's different when we have a collaboration between social workers and service users, but in practice research, it's interesting that while the researcher are being looked upon as the other by the practitioner is looked upon as the other by the researcher. And in that way, the participants in practice research process both have to work on being othered and by their partners and characterizing their partners as others. So although this process of othering could be seen as disturbing, dangerous, and difficult, the negotiation process will make it possible to encircle, focus on central issues for every partner, and through the dialogue, widen the understanding of why this disturbing, dangerous, and difficult issue is central to the other. This understanding makes it possible for both partners to work for the adoption of the different issue or parts of the different issue into a common project or a collaboration. So to be able to establish this negotiation process, both partners must accept to be liable to critique. Specifically a critique on how things have been accomplished so far. Could be traditions for doing social work or traditions for doing research, but also liable to an ongoing critique during the research project. Probably findings will reveal problems within practice. And I mean, practice don't like to be criticized and have problems. So we have to discuss that, we have to negotiate that, and probably the research design, or you could even say the lack of a research design, will be critically discussed by researchers. And within that, we have new negotiations.
So what in fact we have been talking about or negotiating about is the troubled water. And I guess that troubled water is part of life in practice research.
I think it is, and bridges do not have to make troubled water go away. You just have to make it possible to work on while being troubled, or disturbed, or othered, or contradicted, or challenged, and while meeting outsiders, being pushed out of your comfort zones, looking at problems from both the macro, meso, and micro level.
Perhaps that's the Scandinavian or the Nordic way, not to say either or neither nor, but to say both and.
Negotiation.
Yeah.
No, I disagree.
Come on.
Okay, I'm just making fun in a Nordic way.
But seriously, Lars, is the perspective that we have been talking about Nordic? Is it not a question of negotiation and reflection as a part of developing society and social work research? And this is surely not something that we are keeping to each other or keeping to us. It belongs to everybody. It's a global perspective.
Yeah, no problem. It's a deal with me, but don't tell Erwin. It ruins the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Lars and Ilse, for an entertaining and thought-provoking presentation. It was really lovely to listen to. We're going to head straight over to Tim Sim from Hong Kong, who's going to have a presentation with PowerPoint slides, so if we can just have these slides come down, please. Thanks, Lars.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Timothy Sim from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Originally born and bred in Singapore, and then I've got some Singaporeans at the back. We've got quite a delegation from Singapore as well. And then I've been working in Hong Kong for about 6 years. But prior to that, I was with Hong Kong U for 6 years. So altogether, I've been in Hong Kong for 12 years. I'm an outsider to mainland China. In other words, my great-grandfather was from China, and then my father was the first generation of migrant living in Singapore, and I'm the second. My previous department head, Angelina Yuan, maybe some of you know her. She was the immediate past president of IASSW, and yeah, she told me, if you come to Poly U, we will bring you into China. I said, okay, I'll join you. And it is really the interest of being able to work in China, mainland China, that has brought me to Hong Kong this round. And I've been very privileged to work in China for the past 6 years, mainly in the area of disaster. So I've been focusing on working with disaster-affected regions in China, particularly Sichuan. If you are aware of the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake, we have some 90,000 people who either perished or missing. So I've been there for the past 6 years and beginning to work on disaster risk reduction. I think some of you may know Lina Dominelli. Yeah, Lina and we are now working in Shanxi area to increase the resilience. And both in Sichuan and in Shanxi, we are using action research or some form of practice research to do what we do. And it's been very exciting, but that's not the focus of my talk today. I would like to give you an idea on the preliminary on practice research in the People's Republic of China, mainland China, that would not include Hong Kong, that would not include Macau, that would not include Taiwan, if I'm politically correct to say. But I'm going to focus only on mainland China, and I say this is a preliminary review because the work is in progress. So whatever results I'm going to present to you needs to be further analyzed. I would like to bring you to the core of Chinese culture, and that's got to do with Confucius teaching. And I was thinking about my presentation this morning. I was reminded about the Chinese tradition in thinking and knowing. Central to the Confucius teachings are 8 key tenets, and that's found in Li Ji Da Xue. I'm going to speak in Mandarin. That's got to do with 格物致知诚意正心修身齐家治国平天下. Now basically, I've translated it, and I may not be totally accurate. First, it's about studying the phenomena of nature, of things and surroundings, acquiring knowledge, inculcate truthfulness, cultivate righteousness, develop self, establish the family, build the nation, bless the world. Doesn't this sound very social work? I thought that's very interesting. And it's also very, very related to practice research. And here we go. In Chinese tradition, core to our Chinese belief is what we promote very much in social work. And so I'm just curious if Chinese social work practitioners and researchers would go back to our core and our traditions in understanding practice research. Now, before we go any further, I would like to also tell you that this philosophy has been greatly debated over the past. I like what Elsa and Lars was talking about earlier about the debate. And so in this Confucius thinking, for example, in the past hundreds of years, the famous Ming dynasty Chinese philosopher WANG Yangming also emphasized that knowing and practice are integral. And there must be practice in knowing and knowing in practice. The two cannot be separate, said Wang. And he was against the position of studying the phenomena of nature to acquire knowledge. To me, it's almost like the evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence debate. And I thought that was interesting. Now, to give you a bit more background before I talk about some of the key issues in practice research in China, you may want to know about the social work development. One of our colleagues from Sun Yat-sen University presented about the development of social work in China. Maybe not all of you were there. So it's very briefly, social work was reinstated in 1980s after the open door economic policy. It was started in 1920s, but since 1949, when we have the communist regime, we didn't have that continuing until 1990s. As of today, there are about 224 school social work departments and schools, and there are about 103 Master of Social Work program today, and there are some 360,000 social workers, 2,400 NGOs today. By 2020, we expect to develop 1,450,000 social workers. That's the aim of the government, and we are not far from it, right? So, there is great implication for us to think about practice research because social work is picking up in terms of its development at really a breakneck speed. Now, what is the state of practice research in mainland China? Now, the preliminary results from a content analysis of Chinese literature that I have done, it's one evidence I'm going to, or one perspective I'm going to present to you. And this is articles that I managed to find from the China National Knowledge Infrastructure. For those who are interested in Chinese studies, CNKI in short is a very important database dating back to 1915 to current. And I'm also going to give you a more in-depth view based on a self-administered survey with a group of 38 part-time Master of Social Work students with practice experience from 9 Chinese provinces in April 2014 in preparation of this presentation today. Now, let's go to the first set of data that I have prepared for you, and that's using CNKI, the China National Knowledge Infrastructure. Using the Salisbury Statement, I have tried to define practice research. By embarking on this, I realized that it is very difficult for me to be able to grapple with what is practice research, because when I started analyzing, started deciding which article to include, I realized I had great difficulty. So I need to revisit again after this conference. So we used keywords like social work, practice, research, evidence-based, and combination of these keywords in CNKI. I had 2 research assistants to help me with this, guided by the key question, who published what? As I've said, this is still work in progress. Let me answer some of these questions. When practice research got published, and how much of it? We found about 1,890 articles using those keywords, and out of this lot, we sieved out and we found about 382 articles from the database. The earliest article that I can find that I consider, or we consider, social work practice research was found in 1998. That's not too long ago. And it was not until 2005 you get to have about 10 articles that we considered practice research. And not until 2010 you have an average of 50 articles published that could be considered as practice research. Who published? Academic, not surprisingly, about 80%. Practitioners, about 20% or less. Authorship, mostly single-authored. We have group, and so you can imagine I would be drawing the analysis that there is very little collaboration that was going on in the past. And there is about 1.6 article, about some 30 articles that were published by an organization, say a unit, in a school or by an organization. So what did this practice research talk about? Now, the target client mostly are adolescents, and there is a whole lot, about 1/3, that is mixed. So they talk about general and not specific to any clientele. And then children is another major focus. And then you have the other categories. So children and adolescents is a main concern of social work practice research in China. Then I tried to find out the areas of practice. Unlike in the United States, practice research is more related to health and mental health. In China, it's more to do with community development. It's 37%, then followed by mental health and all the others. The length of article, which is something very interesting, and for those who are not familiar with the publications in China, most articles are just 3 to 5 pages. It's a very different way of publishing in Chinese academic journals. First, we do not do literature review. Second, we may not have a section on discussion. So you can get articles who are just 1 to 2 pages, or most of the articles that we found to be practice research related are about 3 to 5 pages. I've got samples and I can show you later on if you're interested. And what are the type of, if we were to scrutinize, what kind of practice research basically is more theory. When we say theory, they discuss about the concepts of what practice research is about, the importance of practice research, for example, and those that involve participants, what we call research, and there is about 30% of articles that would involve interviews or clients. And there is also quite a big number of reflection papers and personal reflections on their work after working with a case or after being after running or organizing some services in rural areas. And there are also some book reviews. Now, I'm then zeroing into the research, so-called research that involves clients, right? So you've got case studies, individual case analysis. This makes the bulk. Case studies are different from individual case analysis because a case study usually is got to do with a city, the Shanghai Elderly Service. So that's a case study. And we have a lot of such case studies, and particularly reflection about the systems that are in place for elderly services, the experience of running a youth offender program. So these are the kind of case studies. And then individual case analysis involves a one case study, for example, an elder or a child. Right? So these are the bulk that you can see as far as practice research is concerned in mainland China, right? And practice-based related ones, like they have a pre-post test, not necessarily RCT, yeah, you have about 20%. The research method used is quite evenly spread between quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. Research design-wise, cross-sectional mostly. You do have some longitudinal one that would last for more than 6 months, for example. You would also take note that there are a lot of unspecified and unknown in these articles that I managed to find because they don't necessarily clearly indicate what they are. In terms of random assignment, you realize that there are some 37.5% of the articles I found use random assignment. Non-random ones would be 21, and as I've said, unspecified ones, the bulk. We don't exactly know what is the design. And research design, in terms of control group, without control group, it takes up about half of it. And those with control group is a small percentage, and again, we don't know most, about 40% of the articles did not clearly state it. How many people are involved? How many clients were involved in these studies? Mostly 1 to 10, and 1 to 30, I beg your pardon. This is 1 to 30 because I collapsed 1 to 10 and 11 to 30. This is a mistake. It's 1 to 30 is about 40%. 31 to 100 participants, about 20 of them. And so you can see that the sample size for our studies are basically rather small. Let me do a summary very quickly for you. Now, only one practice research article was found each year from 1998 to 2004, and an average of about 50 practice research articles from 2010 onwards. Most practice research were conducted by academics, and there was little collaboration between academics and researchers. Children and adolescents were the main focus in terms of clientele, with a focus on community development and mental health in terms of concentration. Most practice research articles were 3 to 5 pages long, aimed at discussing practice research. Of the practice research involving participants, about 30% were cross-sectional case studies, followed by individual case analysis using either quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. The majority involved a small sample size of less than 30 participants with using random assignment but without a control group. Now, that's one set of the data to give you a sense or a glimpse of what practice research is like. I've decided then to talk to, I took the opportunity to conduct a self-administered survey of the MSW students who were visiting Hong Kong. It's a class that took place in our university, and so this is what I hear from them. Now, these 38 MSW students were attending their last semester in Hong Kong, and they are from about 9 provinces, and it is a self-administered survey returned in 2 weeks. 2 weeks were given to them in a sealed envelope, and no names were required, so it's anonymous, and it was 100% response rate. Basically, these students, about half men, half women, they are about 32 years old. We have the oldest who was about 50, and yeah, that's the mean. 27 to 48 is the age range. Most of them are Han Chinese, only 2 minority Chinese, and most of them have a basic degree in social work, but not all of them have a basic degree in social work. And current employment, about 16 of them work in NGO, and about 3 academics, and 2 civil servants, and out of the group, about 17 were not gainfully employed because they wanted to quit their job to come to Hong Kong. And they pay a big price to come to Hong Kong because their bosses didn't allow them to come. And they decided, we'll just quit. So they did. And the work experience, the mean age or the mean experience was 6 years, 2 months, and ranged from 1 to 11 years. And when I asked them how much practice research training they have, about 2 times on the average, and the time span is about 14.7 hours. And when asked if they have any experience, the bulk of them do not have any experience in practice research, about 60%. Those who have done once is about 20%, twice about 10%, 3 times 5%, and others who didn't quite answer the question. So there is a very simple questionnaire, and I asked, I am familiar with general practice research concept. 84 agreed, 84% agreed. I find practice research difficult. 55 disagreed, they didn't find it difficult. And I'm familiar with practice research literature. Half of them don't think they are familiar. I understand different types of practice research. Most of them don't feel that they feel familiar with the different types of practice research methods. I'm interested to find out more, 100%, and half of them said very interested. My organization currently conducts, it's almost half-half. My organization supports my participation, again, is almost half-half. Now, what is your view of practice research? Now, this is the open-ended question. There were 3 major themes that evolved out of this question. Quite a number of them feel that it is helpful in professional development. And when they say it is helpful in professional development, they mean it's helpful in improving service quality, it increases individual professional capacity, it integrates practice and theory, and professional and personal reflection. Now, another theme that emerged out of that question, what is your view of practice research? About 29% said it is helpful in developing indigenous social work. And this is not a term that we have used or commonly heard in this conference, but among my counterparts in China, this is a formal concern. And they feel that practice research would be able to help develop local social work or indigenous social work. It is difficult to conduct practice research. Many of them felt that they have insufficient external support, insufficient time and space, low motivation because they have got so many other jobs to do, inadequate experience. So what support do you wish to have to conduct practice research? We asked. They said we would like to have professional support and organizational support. When they talked about professional support, they were particularly talking about training, supervision, consolidation and publication, professional collaboration. I shan't go into a lot of details, but that's just to give you a glimpse. And organization administrative support and administrative support, they talked about hoping to get financial support, time support, opportunities in conducting practice research, and manpower support. And these are what our counterparts in China wish to have, based on a very convenient and small sample size. Now this is what one of the participants said. We need to develop indigenous social work through practice research, but the research we learn in class are mainly theoretical. It's all theories. There is little practice involved because many of their teachers are not practitioners. In fact, many of their teachers may not be even trained in social work. So participants, practitioners hardly have the time or financial support to conduct research. Even when we manage to publish, they are usually restricted to sharing of experience, reflections, basically. So in sum, all the participants reported that they were familiar with the practice research concepts and were interested to find out more about practice research. While most of them did not find practice research difficult, the majority did not understand the different types of practice research and methods and were not familiar with the literature. About half of them worked with organizations that are currently conducting practice research and would provide support financially and time for them to be involved. Now, in general, 2/3 of the participants were of the persuasion that practice research is helpful in promoting professional development of social work in China specifically. They believe practice research can improve service quality, individual professional capacity, integrate practice and theory, and increase professional and personal reflection. 1/3 of them believe that practice research can enhance the development of indigenous social work, and 1/4 found it difficult to conduct practice research because of the reasons I have mentioned briefly earlier. The survey participants would like to receive professional support and organizational support to conduct practice research. Specifically, they would like to have more training and supervision, consolidate and publish their practice research, and collaborate more with other professionals. They hope their organizations could provide more finance, more time, more manpower, and more opportunity. I've been working back home in Singapore and in Hong Kong, and many of these issues are common. And I think it's probably also common in some of the other places represented by our audience here. So is it like, Elsa in Lars was saying, is it a Chinese perspective or is it also global issues? Now, in conclusion, practice research it's a beginning enterprise and it's emerging in China. More bridges need to be built, particularly between practitioners and academics to collaborate, between different disciplines so that we can learn from them, and between Easts and Wests, so as to speak, the Occidental and the Oriental. And I truly and really hope that more of you would visit us in our part of the world, so we'll be able to have that dialogue with you. Now, this is what one of the participants said. Practice research is not well developed in China at the moment. The research of many academics are unconnected to the field, but practice research will help in developing indigenous practice again, is being mentioned, and help to develop local theories and plug the gaps of current theories. This will help to improve the quality of our service, and that's said by one of the participants. What is the way ahead? Considering the salient context to do with the different culture, to do with the socio-economic and political contexts. Social work is very driven by the government in mainland China, and we cannot run away from the political context. And we also have a different context between the urban and the rural. Rural social work is very, very different in mainland China, and that's a big challenge for social workers. And engaging the stakeholders to do with practitioners, academics, NGOs, GNGOs, have you heard of that? Government, non-government organizations. And that's the key, that's the biggest group of organizations. That means government-driven NGOs, and that's very unique in China, but that's a force in China, social work development. And government organizations and clients to understand what is practice research. It's interesting to hear what Elsa and Lars talk about the dialogue with our clients, and I enjoyed a wonderful presentation by Sharon and Tis yesterday from the UK, talking about engaging service users. And I asked a question to Tis yesterday about the maturity of our clients. When we talk about maturity, we can talk about both chronological age. For example, do you ask a child, an adolescent, and at what age, what is the cutoff? But more importantly, I was talking about the awareness of rights, the awareness of what they can get as service users. In China, especially in the rural, I think that's really a very different situation. And so we also have the minority groups. We have a lot of minority groups in China, and that can be very, very sensitive politically. So some of the conversation that we heard this morning, I would take it with great caution, for example, when we do it in China. And reviewing the Salisbury and Helsinki practice research statements, and perhaps crafting one that will be useful for guiding Chinese practice researchers or practitioners. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Another very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. We'll now give our plenary speakers an opportunity to comment on each other's presentations. So shall I ask Lars and Ilse to start by commenting on Tim's presentation, as that was the most recent, and then we'll get Tim to comment on some of the work that you've presented.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim. It was really interesting this kind of adventure you will have to do, and that's what they did in the UK also for the Salisbury Statement. They did a literature review looking at how it is, and it was nice to see how it has expanded from at least from 2010. And I think that we also are in a Nordic perspective, we are in the situation that we should try to do also our literature review of what does it look like now. So I think that's really interesting. And why not do an article together and comparative something? But one of the things that I was triggered about was your questions to the social worker students about what they see as practice research, and I was concerned a bit of what kind of questions you posed them. How did you define practice research? Because we teach practice research at the Helsinki University, and here are a lot of Finnish colleagues here, and they will also tell more about it in the workshop a little bit later. And but this is the experience that we have when we started by asking our students what is practice research, and or we started by doing a lot of theoretical introductions. And it seems that it was difficult to really get a grasp of them. Our students had difficulties. So we started by giving them articles to read as an introduction, so before they can come into our course, they have already read, and they have another perspective, or they're ready for also to take in. So that was interesting to because yeah, how did you do it? What kind of questions did you pose?
Okay. Basically, these are students who have just finished their training in a social work practice course, and the course leader is Dr. Ban Ku, and he is someone who believes in action research a lot. So, in fact, my concern, as with you, would be students may not understand practice research as it is, but see practice research as action research. And that is also one response that I have. Is action research more relevant in China than practice research, or they have different roles? Both, it's like, it's not an either-or situation, but action research would have a different role in the development of social work and social work practice in China. Yeah, so basically that. So I wouldn't be too worried about them not knowing what research is in general, but really, like you said, yeah, they would be more skilled to understanding practice research and not drawing a very clear line between action research and practice research. The question posed to them was very simple because it's self-administered. So in Chinese, it says in the translated way, what do you think about practice research? It's an open-ended question.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that before the Salisbury Statement, we seem to have the Ming dynasty statement as well. The difficult thing about doing this research or survey on publication is that I think quite a lot of practice research is going on without being publicated, or you could say hopefully a lot of practice research. I mean, we have discussions in our own research group about this, and quite a lot of colleagues who are not into the specific area of practice research tell us that they do practice research, or they are doing parts of practice research. So I think that beside this knowledge about who have actually written about it, there's quite a lot of practice research going on. My second comment is well, it actually just comes out of what you said, Tim. It is the discussion of how do we educate social workers to use practice research, and I could be afraid that we kind of turn into a way of doing it, like we teach people how to involve service users. As social workers, we have to make sure that we know the theories and we know the ways how to do it, and then we involve the service users. I think it could be interesting if we could develop the education of practice research together with practice, knowing before we get into the specific theories, the specific methods, we could have discussions with practice and service users of what practice research means to them, how they would like to be involved, and how we could develop this in common. So this is just actually a comment, not specifically on your presentation, but coming out of the discussions of quite a lot of discussion at this conference, and of how do we teach students of social work, and I think if we really want to get into this and want to get into the kind of dialogue that we were talking about, we probably need to invite practice. We need to invite service users into developing the education of in practice research.
Good point. Lars, you want to respond to that? Tim, it's just a comment.
Yeah. Well, I was very impressed by the way they have presented using a very nice background this morning. And in Chinese culture, we have what we call 相声, which is crosstalk. And to me, what they were doing was very much like a crosstalk. But a crosstalk in Chinese culture, it's a form of art that we still use today. It's supposed to be very comical. It's going to be very funny. But they were funny enough. And more than being funny, I thought they were very thoughtful. And I thought I cannot but, start thinking about our own development in China. And I think, yeah, it would be very interesting to see how we will be able to arrive one day in China where we will be able to have the kind of dialogue, the agreement to disagree, and with all the different stakeholders, particularly the authorities. It's not easy for us to a great extent because it's a different political situation. And I totally agree with Elsa about the need to consider the political context and the political processes in a place like ours. I think the kind of politics you talk about probably would be very different from what I understand and what we experience in China. And nevertheless, I thought the political sensitivity and the need to consider the political processes, it's something that I feel is not talked about enough. And it's not only on the micro level, it's also on the macro level where the political negotiations and processes ought to be in place when I think we are serious about doing practice research. Yeah, so.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I think it's also important that we all research doesn't have to be practice research. We have to also be able to say that what kind of other social work research that we need to do. And I think that was really interesting that your students said about that they think that practice research can have something to give to indigenous social work and practices. So I think that's really interesting too, because I think the way that we also developed and are developing all the time, giving courses on practice research, how to do practice research, is a development all the time. It's changing every year because you have to be flexible, and you have to you turn into new problems, and you test new methods and so on, and that's the creative thing about practice research you need to have. So I think that would be really interesting to look more into that and see what practice research can give.
Well, that's a good point to hand over to the audience then. So there's a microphone going around, and there are a number of people having hands up. So shall we start at the back with Mike?
Yeah, wonderful presentation.
There's a microphone coming your way, Mike.
Really appreciated the presentations this morning, both the interactions as well as the individual contributions. I'm curious about literature and Ilse's comment about reviewing, and Tim's comment also about the extended reviewing of existing literature. There's a topic we haven't really talked about here in this conference, and I think it has huge implications for what happens after this conference and how we communicate with each other, which is language. I can't read Finnish, I can't read Danish, I can't read Swedish, and I certainly can't read Chinese. So one of the questions becomes, how do we recognize that not only has practice research evolved in multiple different ways, developmentally in very different contexts, and find ways to share if we keep assuming that publication globally means English, which I'm finding increasingly ethnocentric. So I'm kind of curious about the panelists' thoughts about how will we find ways to communicate, because obviously the work that you in Hong Kong will need to do, at least in current context, is to publish in English so the rest of us can see and hear, but we can't read Chinese. And so I'm just intrigued with this question of how do we think about the language we use to communicate our experiences in practice research.
Question. Chuck, you want to start?
I would like to just, can I think multimedia is probably a way to go. For example, videos, interviews, and even documentation of practice research through film production. I think that would be very illuminating. And in fact, if you have subtitles for the work that is being presented into different languages, and they can be presented, I think, more than just on paper and words. So if you ask me, I think, for example, podcast by our journals in social work. Say we interview Elsa for 10 minutes and on a specific topic to do with practice research in relation to working in a mental health setting. And I think such could be very useful ways of inspiring and also sharing information.
Yeah, but I forgot her name. But in UK, who was working with user organizations, and she really did and does a lot of a good job on presenting narrative stories by different people and so on. So you can really get a different perspective, a multi-actor perspective. But I think to language is that we need to have the concepts in our own native languages first. So we need to have the ground. We need to understand what we are talking about. So we need to do books, and we are in Finland together with our colleagues now trying to develop the second practice research book that will be in Finnish and in Swedish, because Finland is a bilingual country. But yes, how can you read Finnish and Swedish? And then we will have to also learn how to write in English and do different kinds of bits in English also, because we need that. I realized that, for instance, when it came to the HUSK project, which is a huge project which has a lot of publications and so on, but it's mostly in Norwegian, and so it's important that we have brokers and translators who can bring that to us. So, yes.
Yeah, actually, I think technique will help us. It might not be in your time or in my time, Mike, but I think actually in few years we will have mechanical things. We can translate everything the moment we say it. So in that way, I think technique will help us. And until then, it's okay with English. Until then, we don't mind. The only thing is that it is sometimes difficult to translate the way you discuss things and the way you do social work or research, and in that way English might be more open to see things written in English but from different cultures, and I think that's a problem, that sometimes it's difficult for us to tell about social work or social work research, because we have to also write it into the English or the American culture, and I think that's a problem. But the language, I think, it's too difficult to find another language now.
There's some other questions. There's a hand here, and was up first, and then we'll go to the back.
Anthony from Hong Kong. I'm a little bit confused after 3 days of discussion, because I'm not sure whether we're talking about, among different kind of research, whether we're talking about some scholars doing research about practice or concerning practice, or whether we are talking about research collaboration between scholar and practitioners, or whether we are encouraging practitioners themselves, they being the producer of these social work knowledge. I think somehow we are talking about many different things here, but perhaps we may also need to be very aware of the underlying politics, as Yusa and Lars has been talking about, the underlying politics about these different kinds of research. And the fact that actually, as I said, I'm a practitioner, so I'm much more concerned of how we can encourage people who are really in the practice field to produce knowledge from their own perspective, as Erwin has always been writing in his articles. So, but if this is the concern, I mean, this is not the exclusive concern. I think that we have to be aware of this politics behind and how we can encourage or empower different groups of people to engage in the research that are appropriate, that are acknowledge the constraints that each group of these different kind of researchers they're facing, and to really facilitate their work. The othering concept that you have been using is quite interesting, I would say. It's like in the process of this discussion, we are constituting different kind of subjects, and in fact subjecting them into some kind of bigger discourse about what should be a research. I'm not sure whether this is, and Tim has actually mentioned constituting another subject, which is the Asian and Chinese subject. In a way, this is both useful, I would say. This is both useful and may also be quite dangerous in a way. So I think yesterday I had an occasion to talk with Yusa about the fact that the problems that we are facing in Hong Kong are actually quite global. I mean, we are facing more or less similar to the situation, like the lack of resources, lack of policy, lack of support for practitioners. I think that there must be something which is culturally or socially unique, but that we have to be also aware of the fact that we are in a quite shared global political and social environment. I think this may be something that I think some of the opinion that I would like to share. Thanks.
Thank you. There was a comment. I don't think there was a question in there, but if anybody wanted to respond to the comment, no? Thank you. There was a question at the back.
I was just Chaya Pasek from Israel. I just wanted to reflect on a different language issue that I confront, and that is the privileging in foreign countries of English language publications. I think there's a lot of good practice research going on in Israel. We're a small country, so there's maybe 2 social work journals. And we haven't talked at all here about academic politics, but we get more credits if we publish in English. And there's a limit to how much you can publish in the same 2 local journals. Most of the writing goes on by the academic, with the practitioner maybe taking a more minor role, partly because of writing skills and partly because of time constraints. The academic tends to have more time to write. So that paradoxically, we're producing a lot of practice research, but the dissemination often doesn't get to the local practitioners who can use it best to improve their practice. Because while practitioners in Israel, their English isn't really, the English language journals are not truly accessible to most practitioners. So I don't know if that goes on in other countries, because in Finland it sounded like the opposite, like you were publishing a lot in the local language, and we're thinking about expanding to English. And I think in Israel we need to think about how we're going to flip that around.
I work in a university with a reminder hanging around my neck all the time: you publish or you perish. So academics in the university, like I'm seeing a trend, at least in Hong Kong. It's worrying in social work departments where we have more and more academics being replaced, especially those who are outgoing and retiring, with a generation of academics who have just graduated from very good universities in the UK, in the US, but they have very little practice experience. And they come on board and they begin to write more and publish very well, but our students are complaining that our new teachers are not able to teach them about practice. So that's really another issue, I think, in our part of the world. I've enjoyed working very much with our colleagues in the field, both in Hong Kong and in Singapore, where I think they lead the projects and I participate in the practice. I see clients together with them, but I end up doing the documenting, and I do invite other colleagues in our university to help document, and we have been very successful in working out collaboration relationships where our practitioners also publish, and they can also be lead authors, because many of the stories of change or the narratives and even data belong to the organizations, and we as academics are just riding on that kind of a project, and in fact we are paid to do that. So it's a win-win situation. So I think practitioners need to be able to stand firm and say, look, we are not tools, I think someone mentioned that, for you to collect data, but we are owners of the data set, and academics can actually be a part of it and maybe just a secondary partner. So I think, in my experience, I think it can work out very well. And even for the next generation of academics who are not very savvy with practice, will be able to work out with frontline workers if there is an openness. Yeah.
More to Anthony's question about what are we really talking about. Of course, when we're talking about publishing, it seems like that it's the academic work that and the world that we are, and as Tim says, you have to publish, and I don't think it's just a question about you have to publish. I think it's also very important to develop the theory and the methodology of it, and one way of doing it is to publish and discuss with others about it. But then how are then practitioners involved? I know I had the advantage to visit Hong Kong and your practice research conferences, and there are practitioners, mostly practitioners, who are involved. We perhaps don't have many practitioners here as participants. So I think that's one of the questions that we need to look at. Because listening to people who are now participating here, they find a lot of joy and empowerment listening to other people. And I think that kind of enjoying and empowerment we should also be able to work also for different actors, so that we will have a multi-actor conference. So perhaps that is the challenge that is ahead. But in a Nordic perspective, how do we guarantee that practitioners are involved? we have university agency collaborations long for many years, and so we have that communication. It's always relevant, and the people that are doing research, I think I'm a social worker, so and I think most of our professors in social work are social workers in Finland. So we have that. It's not a we have that hat on us. We have different hats. So it cannot survive if we don't have a true and genuine discussion together with practitioners and users and so on. So we have to be. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, just a comment on the issue of publishing. I think we have a huge problem, even more than the language problem about publication, because either we write articles that nobody reads, or we write articles that are not accepted by the university. And that is the problem. And I think from a practice research perspective or social work perspective, I think we really have to keep on writing for social workers and not for researchers. We have to do that, writing articles in international, writing internationally, but I think we really have to keep on, we have to keep on doing both, writing articles in our own languages, and then we have to, of course, also write in English, also to have a discussion with researchers and practitioners from other countries. But I mean, it's a big problem, and it's very difficult to solve. And I just hope that we won't solve it by only writing in English and internationally. And going back to the question of what are we actually talking about, well, I mean, this conference, we are talking about a lot of different issues and a lot of different perspectives in practice research. I'm mainly talking about research as a collaboration, as one of the possibilities that you gave. And I think we need to encourage practitioners, researchers, service users. And one other thing that I think really has been discussed at this conference, that is the organizations. Because social workers, they need the support from the organization to go into practice research projects. And maybe we have to focus more on that, how to encourage, persuade, how to get into the struggle with the organization, because if we don't have them, or if they don't support the social workers or the practitioners or the service users, it won't be possible. So I think that is one of the things that I have learned for this conference, that is to put more focus on the organization.
And that's probably a good place to stop. We'll give Tim one chance.
To it, I think practice research has a greater emphasis on the research than the practice. I think there are 2 points that I would like to just very quickly say. One is, I think I've worked with organizations, social work agencies, that do not share the kind of knowledge that we generate. So we worked out something very nice, but they don't tend to share with the other agencies. 2, demonstration. I think we don't have enough demonstration of practices that are research-based. For example, through the media, through a documentary, through newspaper reports, through, I don't know how you'll be able to showcase the practice, not through research papers. And so people will be able to see what is being done, the processes, the issues, the considerations. I think it needs to be more than just papers being published. So I think we need to be very creative in helping our professionals, our frontline practitioners, having done a piece of practice research, demonstrate it and showcase what they do through all sorts of avenues and platforms. And I think that's really something that academics can also participate in, helping our colleagues in the field to be able to do that more than just on paper.
it stimulates well. See, there's so many lessons and learning that we can take from this session. I ask you to put your hands together for these speakers. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to the last plenary of this conference. And I think we're all in agreement that we've had the most wonderful 3 days of interesting lectures, networking with each other, getting to know new colleagues. And I think that this has largely been influenced and helped by the wonderful, generous scholarship of Erwin. And I think that's just overridden the whole culture and atmosphere of this conference. So thank you, Erwin, for that. Now, Dr. Martin Weber is a reader in social work at York. And in the spirit of the conference, I'm not going to say anything about him. But all I can assure you is that his lecture will definitely not be null or nil. So thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Lynette. I hope it will be neither null nor nil, and I also hope it won't be a lecture. But let's see how this goes. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation, Erwin, for me to be here this afternoon to talk. I have a little apology to make to Erwin. As you may have noticed, he's been rather preoccupied with organisation over the last few days. And reflecting back over the last few months, I feel that I may have heightened his workload a little. I've just finished off an edited collection about translating or using research in social work practice, and because Erwin is obviously the foremost thinker in the field, I asked him to write the foreword for this book. And he asked me, what sort of timeline are you thinking of? Obviously with the conference in mind, and with the publisher breathing down my neck, I said, well, can you manage it within a few weeks? This was a couple of months ago. And of course he did. He read the manuscript and did a fantastic foreword. So I'm very grateful to Erwin for turning that around so quickly, and I apologise for adding to your workload. Okay, I've got a rather mystical title of this presentation. And I'm trying to bring together a number of themes which I think have emerged through the conference in a variety of different ways. Methodological pluralism is going to be an integrative theme. I'm going to come back to that at the very end. And I'm going to start with a better null than nil. What on earth do I mean by that? Before I do, I want to reflect on the metaphor of a bridge, which we've had at this conference. It's been a really useful visual clue to what we're talking about. Bridging from one place to another. We can debate what those places are. From the place of practice to the place of scholarship, or whatever we think they are. We've had some fantastic bridges. So I couldn't leave the conference without giving you one of my own bridges. So here's a local bridge to me. It's rather humble. It's a little footbridge over the River Skell in Ripon, in North Yorkshire, where I live. But it's actually not that bridge I want to talk to you about. It's this one, right next to it. And you might say, well, where on earth is the bridge here? Well, anybody see the bridge? It's underwater. Priest Lane, it goes through the stream. Okay, it's a ford. So the bridge is the bed of the river. We're using the natural bed of the river to get across. Now, in ancient times, he says, coming from an ancient city, that monks of days of old used to use these shallow places in the river to cross from one bank to the other, and it's how these ancient settlements grew up around bridging points in the river. But I think this is a really useful metaphor for thinking about practice research. Are we walking across the footbridge, or are we getting our feet wet and going through the ford? Now for me, the location of practice research is somewhere about here, right in the middle. We talked this morning about troubled water, a bridge over troubled water. We've also had metaphors of what is from one bank bridging across to another. For me, practice research is that zone in the middle. When I was a child, I used to play in a ford similar to this. I used to build dams, have a great time. Now, 30 years later, my daughter does exactly the same with her friends in this stream, just upstream a little. So I like the metaphor of play. And really that's what I want to do a little bit with you this afternoon, is to play in this stream. That practitioners, researchers, we are social workers engaging together in play in the stream, using the bed as the natural connection. The bed is the natural connection between the two banks. Now you might say, well, this is just a typically quiet British gentle stream. Okay, it's easy to cross. As a nod to colleagues from Australia, this is how you might do it down under, as we say. He takes his time. At this point you think, is he really going to do this? It looks as though he's going under. There you go, he's going in the right direction.
He's got it fighting leg, he's got it.
Almost leave the other bank. Here we go. And he's made it! Hey! There we go. Don't forget to empty the water out. Okay, that's a bit of fun. There might be some more. We are focusing on the river rather than a bridge. And I want to focus on the natural bridge that's kind of underneath this. I want to start by looking at some research that's been conducted by practitioners. What I found in my experience, practitioners start with a hypothesis that's generated out of their practice. It's a definition of practice research, perhaps. And practitioners become very despondent when they find different results than they anticipated. They do a research project and then come back to me and say, well, that's enough. I'm not doing it ever again. It's been too much work and I didn't find what I wanted to find. So my argument is, hold on, have a look at the null finding. Have a look at what you actually found, and within that, there are some hidden depths, some nuances. And I just want to give you 3 examples of that. The first one is a study conducted by Matthew Buchel, who's a social worker at Lambeth Hospital in South London. He was interested in whether people of a black and ethnic minority origin, people who are not of a white British origin, had equal access to an inner city home treatment team. Now we all know the data that people of a black and ethnic minority are approximately 4 times as likely to be compulsorily detained, going through a mental health crisis, than people of a white British origin. We know that outcomes are poorer from this group as well. What he was hypothesising was, with the home treatment service, there should be, in principle, equal access to people of any ethnic group, and he was concerned that there wasn't. So his hypothesis was that the service would see more people of a white British origin. So these are his findings. I'm only going to very briefly highlight a couple of things. I've only got one star up at the right to tell you where to look. And you can see that the p-value is not significant. That ethnicity was not associated with inpatient admission or a home treatment as an option during a mental health crisis. So he went away despondent. Okay, before he went away, we did a multivariate analysis and looked at this in more detail to try to make sense of what actually was happening. What is predicting whether somebody is going to have home treatment or an admission to a psychiatric unit? The 3 stars over there are indicating it's something to do with diagnosis. In particular, depression and anxiety is associated with somebody more likely to have access to home treatment. Accommodation status, people with insecure accommodation status are more likely to be in hospital. And down the bottom, where the referral comes from is also important. You'll see at the bottom, referrals from the police were less likely to end up in a home treatment. Now, that in itself is interesting, because if you know the context in the UK at the moment, street triage services are being piloted, where a community psychiatric nurse goes on the beat with police officers to try to divert people away from hospital. Now, the point I'm making here is that his practice research wasn't at all considered when this policy was made. When this was introduced, I haven't seen this cited or mentioned at all, but it is absolutely what his research is saying. So the take-home message from that is, how can we help the practice research we do to have an impact? How can it actually inform policy? Okay, the second example hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, so some of this may prove to be different after it's gone through peer review, but here we go. Janine Hudson conducted a national survey of approved mental health professionals in the UK. These people, who are mainly social workers, are provided with additional training to do assessments under the Mental Health Act to compulsorily admit people to hospital. Now, the survey was of workload and burnout, and predictably she found that people were feeling pretty stressed. 55% didn't feel valued by their employer. 2 in 5 didn't want to continue as an AMP, or at least were unsure about doing so. But there was a significant finding about burnout, that only 6%, a very small proportion, were actually burnt out. Now, perhaps you could argue those who were burnt out didn't fit in the survey, so that's underestimating it. And that probably is true. A very high threshold, a very high proportion met the threshold for common mental disorder, 44%. General population average in the UK is somewhere around 15 to 20. So very high risk. If you look at the findings in a bit more detail, why that high rate of common mental disorder? These are the results of the regression. I'm not giving you any numbers. Sorry about that. I'm just giving you a few of the variables which were associated with that high level of common mental disorder. And what was most interesting, down the bottom here, that workload associated with being an AMP, which is the thing which you would expect to be associated with depression, was not in the regression model. It wasn't one of the predictors. But the same question, when we asked about non-AMP duties, so this was social work, this was the normal social work practice that a social worker would be doing in a community mental health team, if they felt less happy about that, then their rates of common mental disorder were higher, which says something about, hold on a minute, what about being a social worker in that context? They felt okay about being an AMP, with dealing with the law, dealing with really stressful and demanding assessments, but being a social worker, hold on a minute, I'm not feeling too good about that. That's what that is saying, alongside all of the other variables as well, but that's an independent predictor. these are some of the themes which emerged from the thematic analysis. This is part of the methodological pluralism, if I can say that, part of the talk, using multiple methods. These were some of the themes which came up, which mainly related to the AMP role, because I think AMPs had that in mind when they were thinking about it. But particularly down the bottom, we've got role not being understood or supported, not feeling valued, issues going on in mental health social work practice in the UK were most definitely reflected there. I'm going to come back to some of that in a minute, but we need to understand it in the context of crisis care being a big issue at the moment in the UK. That the austerity has meant that resources have been pulled out of mental health services very quietly, so that people don't really know about it, but it's most definitely happening. And AMPs are having a much more difficult job, just finding a bed. Okay, that's the second one. The third one is, again, it's another mental health example, I'm afraid, it's my background. A practitioner, Richard Kingsford, was interested in looking at social deprivation to see if that predicted the outcomes of a period of time spent with a crisis resolution and home treatment team. His hypothesis was people living in areas higher in social deprivation, the outcomes will be poorer. And the univariate analysis, there's the star at the bottom, found that. The areas which were most deprived had poorer outcomes, had less successful outcomes. But when you do the logistic regression, looking at all of the variables together, it becomes non-significant. What is significant, though, is where they came from. The enhanced CMHT variable is where the referral came from. So this is indicating that people had pre-existing higher levels of need that predicted their poorer outcomes when they were referred onto a crisis resolution and home treatment team. So again, he was despondent. He said to me, look, this disproves my hypothesis. What am I going to do with this research? Now, he was a practitioner who was doing, as all of the others were, a post-qualifying master's program. So he was doing the research for that program and then he left. He graduated. Didn't take this further. But then at the current time in the UK, another research team in another university is looking at crisis teams and saying, well, it's the fidelity to the model, it's something additional which we need to look at. It is exploring what the crisis teams are doing in the quality of their care, which is a problem. So again, he had something to say about crisis teams in his research, which in no way related to this research. It wasn't able to take it on. And that, for me, is a real dilemma. That practitioner research can be of high quality. We had really good debates about whether it should be published or not. I think my point of view is that both. We should aim to disseminate to all communities, to use multimedia and publications where we can, and it can be of high quality, so it can be published. But we need to find a way of taking it forward, that it shouldn't just be to inform that practitioner's practice, it should be to inform practice and policy on a wider level. And that's a way of moving along from these null findings. Now, I don't have an answer to this, it's really a question that I'd like to pose back to you. Now, moving on from this and thinking, well, what does this mean to the larger picture that's going on at the moment within mental health social work and where practice research fits into this? We have a situation in the UK at the moment where services are to a certain extent based on evidence. That psychiatry and psychology are very good at doing trials around their interventions, and we have national guidelines which are based on randomised controlled trial evidence, which is great. The problem is for social workers that unless they're able to either be trained or undertake these interventions which other disciplines have developed, then their contribution becomes uncertain. And that's going back to Janine's study, and what she found was that practitioners were uncertain about what they could contribute. And for me, the problem here is that social work practice, as you are more than aware, is complex, messy, and difficult to articulate. It's difficult to put in to an intervention manual. and even intervention manuals themselves, as we again have discussed quite a lot over the last couple of days, are not the whole picture. We need to use them very, very carefully. So the question I've been grappling with is at the bottom here. How can complex practice be articulated in the form of interventions which are then amenable to experimental validation, so that we can generate an evidence base to argue with psychiatry and psychology that social work has a valuable role within mental health services? And this is where methodological pluralism comes in. Now, I'm talking about a paper that was published in the Journal of Evidence-Based Social Work earlier this year, in which I described a process of how this might work, moving through a variety of methodological design and testing stages until we get to the point where we have evidence-informed, evidence-based, or interventions which have research that is somehow supporting them, and however we conceptualize that. I'm going to talk about this in the context of a study, or a series of studies I've been undertaking around enhancing people's social networks. I'm starting from the basis of epidemiology. As you might guess, if you were to focus on individual social networks, you will find that people with an experience of a mental health problem, either with depression, SMI here stands for severe mental illness, these groups of people have access to fewer people within their networks, and the people that they are in contact with are not as resourceful as others within the general population. So here's a quick graph of the epidemiology. General population is higher than the other groups. A simple statement, simple epidemiology, but a complex problem to solve. How do we help people to build their networks? Systematic reviews we've conducted have not found interventions which provide that answer. There are some clues, it doesn't provide the whole answer. So we were then faced with the problem of how do we design an intervention which represents the complexity of someone's life and is able to support them to develop their social contacts and their intervention. And we had to start with where practitioners were up to. We had to start with good practice. And we conducted a qualitative study using ethnographic methods across a variety of services which seemed to be doing this well. And we had to be quite careful about identifying places which seemed to be good at connecting people. And it's a rather large study, so it was not just focusing on a small group of people who did this quite well, and using a multi-phase method where a researcher would go in and interview, work alongside practitioners, and just spend an awful lot of time understanding the richness and diversity of that practice. And then through a process, iteratively, with both service users and practitioners, we came to an understanding as to what good practice looked like. And through a process of a Delphi and so on, we were able to develop a model. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, I haven't got much time to talk about the model. What I want to just briefly say is that the words that are scattered around this diagram are the themes that emerged out of the qualitative research. So we did the usual thing with qualitative research in exploring thematically what the practice looked like, but then we sat down with service users and practitioners and said, can you help us make sense of this? Or rather, we reframed that and said, how do you understand it? And this is the result of that. So the intervention model came out of practice, and it was with practitioners and service users we were able to define it in this way. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave a discussion of what that means to another time. I don't have that luxury at the moment. We developed practice guidance more to explain what the model meant than what you are supposed to do. The model is an illustration of a practice, what it should look like, and what I can say, if I just go back a minute, to the model, that you can see two spinning circles, and the two spinning circles are representing a process which both a worker and an individual goes through. We're not talking about a linear step, it's something which is dynamic and moving and iterative.
We're feeling much more invigorated about the way in which we work. We can talk about our work in quite a sort of creative way.
It's all about relationship building, and it's about prioritising relationship building in the support that we provide to people.
It's just a really good illustration of what we want. It's now about putting it into practice.
Clearly, you know, it's about the social work model, I guess, being repackaged.
Before I came across the model, I always felt there was a better way. I've worked with agencies for far too long now who use purely a statutory approach.
I think the very fact that it's so person-centred here and it's very focused on sort of well-being, and there's opportunities to link up with certain other professionals.
That model is the way forward. It's the answer to the financial crisis that social care is in.
It was reassuring to hear what Audrey was saying in terms of reinvigorating the identity of mental health social work.
Those were just some practitioners talking about the model in relation to their own work, and I must acknowledge the work there of a user-led social enterprise which worked with us in creating some video resources around the model. What we did then was, okay, we've got a fancy diagram, it spins around, people say, ooh, ah, isn't it lovely, but does it actually do anything? Does it make sense in practice? What happens if we go back into different agencies, different teams, and introduce them to the model and say, can you model your service and your agency on this basis? What happens then? So we can call this efficacy testing. So we went into 16 agencies to see whether they could adapt to working in this way. Provided some training, we interviewed new referrals into the team, and we worked with both adults with a learning disability and adults with a mental health problem of all ages, focused on some key social outcomes and also mental well-being. I'm not going to go into the detail of what we did, just to say that we were interested in the notion of fidelity. If people are, if there's greater fidelity to that swirly-whirly model, then will outcomes be better? So it's kind of a quasi-experimental design which we used along with a process evaluation and an economic evaluation. Quickly, just to highlight some of the findings, and I'm going to say what we did with some of this. The sample is pretty typical of people who use NHS mental health and social care services. And down the bottom you can see that we had 30 out of the 155 who were in the high fidelity group. Now we measured fidelity through a triangulation process of questionnaires with service users, practitioners, and also researcher observations and notes and data as well. The fidelity measurement is a complex thing which I don't think we've yet got right, but it's something which we're working on. But anyway, for the purposes of analysis, we looked at the 30 in the high fidelity group versus the others that we followed up over the 9 months. These are some of the findings very briefly. The green line are those in the high fidelity group, those in the low and medium fidelity group are in red. Access to social capital is our primary outcome, where we're interested in whether people's networks became more resourceful. It's not about whether they knew more people, had more Facebook friends. It's about whether they could obtain resources through their networks, which is obviously important for recovery. And you can see the green line going up and the red line flatlining. So those within the high fidelity group started off at a lower level and raised up. And it's a significant difference. And in the regression models, we're finding that fidelity is correlated with increased positive life events. So it's something positive is happening. Mental well-being, a different pattern is emerging. Both are going up, might be growing up as well. Both are going up. No significant difference between the two groups. But again, positive life events are there associated with improvements. Thirdly, perceived social inclusion was measured, and we do see a significant difference at time 2. The green group again is going up higher, and there are obviously other variables that are associated with that as well. So the message so far is broadly positive, that although it's quasi-experimental, we don't have random allocation, we don't know whether there are pre-existing things which would mean that people are in the groups. Well, this kind of indicates that there are. The costs in the two groups, the red group is much higher, So low, medium fidelity is much higher cost, so it's indicating you're achieving better outcomes at a lower cost. But the problem is, sorry, one more graph before I come on to the problem. The high fidelity group, again, with the quality of life adjusted years, which is the measure which health economists use, is higher. So it's producing something which is positive. But the problem is, with the top bullet point there, all of the high fidelity agencies were in the third sector. We have an NGO third sector in the UK, which provides services alongside the statutory sector, the NHS and local authority social care. But when we did the fidelity assessment, they were all in one group and not the other, which kind of raises questions about whether the model can actually work within the statutory social work settings. Right, you're going to have to miss some things out. I've only got 3 minutes left. So what do we do with this? Well, what we want to do is to see whether this works internationally. Can you take this model into different countries if it is such a grounded approach to developing it? It's developed out of UK or England context. Can it apply in a different country? And what we wanted to do was not necessarily have to start at the bottom and work our way up, is to make use of these feedback loops that are throughout the model. So we have done some work in Sierra Leone, in West Africa, to test whether some of the ideas that we've generated in this process can be useful and improve services there. Now I've got a video, I haven't got time to show it, so it's on the website and I can show you where to access it to look at some of the work we're doing there. But what we've been doing is some feasibility work, working with the mental health service in Sierra Leone, which is pretty much non-existent. They don't have social workers there. They've got 21 psychiatric nurses they've just trained. And we're going and seeing whether or not we can implement some of this practice with the nurses. So again, we're starting with, and it comes back to this question we were kind of discussing this morning about indigenous social work, that we want to generate or help to support the generation of social work which is indigenous within a country which doesn't have social workers working within mental health services. There are social workers working in other sectors. And how we do that is via a multiple method grounded approach, using the whole repertoire of methodologies that we have available to us. So, some brief conclusions after my ramble is, first of all, that we mustn't be put off by null findings, that they're only the beginning of the story, not the end. It leads on to more questions and we need to be prepared to follow those up. Secondly, we need to think pluralistically about methods. That I haven't talked about a trial because we haven't yet done a trial, but this process is moving towards a trial. So it's using the whole repertoire of methods to evidence our work. And I'm arguing that we can enhance the internal validity of interventions by this process to ensure they're appropriate for each cultural context. Facilitate the use and the embodiment of evidence-informed interventions in practice. The video with the practitioners in really demonstrates that they were able to relate to the model. And for us that was really important, because if they didn't, they would have said, no thanks, I'm not engaging at all with any of this process. So it's working with practitioners to generate that understanding and evidence that helped it to be a success. And I really want to end just with Irwin's integrative model. And I think the yin and the yang is really important to emphasize here, of promoting harmony, rather than having conflict about different designs, that together we should use them to inform our practice. The final thought, after you've gone through the ford, you've been playing in the water, you might not want to get out. You might find it is actually really good fun, it's invigorating, and you might want to just test your brakes to see that they work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now, I wonder if there are any questions. I did try and stop him earlier, but we haven't got, but I think you were in full speed ahead, Martin. So, and I think it was really important to get to the end of that whole story. But I think we've got time, a few minutes for questions. So does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask Martin? He hasn't got a co-presenter to debate with, so it's open to all of you. Any questions? I think everybody's satisfied with what you told them.
I have a question.
Oh,
hi, Mark. I'm Dan Herman. I'm from the School of Social Work here at Silberman School. That's really very interesting work and a great presentation. And the music was wonderful. Here's my question. Could you just, I know you had to rush through, but since you have a couple of minutes, could you say a little bit more about the actual intervention itself? I mean, I think I understood the values behind it and the attitudes of the workers, but I'd be interested in just hearing you describe it in a bit more detail.
Okay, it's quite difficult to describe the intervention in a lot of detail very briefly because we're trying to represent complexity and hence the complex process. At its heart, in the middle of that diagram, is a little box which represents co-production. And what we're arguing is that the worker and the service user are at a point in their working together so that they're actually co-producing the intervention themselves. On the individual side, they're setting the goals. It's about a recovery process where they're identifying what their personal individual goals are. Now, because we've got an eye on developing social networks, which is down in the bottom corner, that bottom corner for you, the worker has to think outside of the box, outside of what a service provides. So it's not about saying, we can meet your need by providing this, this and this service. It's not saying, right, your care plan, we can meet your needs by identifying how we can do that within our existing service. It's saying instead, what are your assets and strengths? What do you come with? And how can we build upon that? Or how can we assist you to develop a relationship with others to enable you to build upon that? So the worker's job is very much around working with the individual and their community, whether that be a geographical community that they're living in, whether that's a community of interest, an online community, a group of people, whoever it is, working with that individual and that group to identify the contacts, the skills, the networks that can assist them to achieve their goals. So it's really very, very broad, and what we're articulating is, and when we have done this presentation to social workers, they say, well, that's what we do anyway. And we say, yeah, that's great. That's exactly what we want to do. We want to articulate some of those complex processes so that we can have this conversation and we can evidence it. And for us, it was about evidencing fidelity, which, as I said, we haven't yet finally got perfectly honed, but we're working on that. And then when you can do that, you can generate evidence in a kind of a trial context and say whether people are working faithfully to the model or not. And then we can have that discussion with psychiatrists and psychologists who say, well, what does a social worker do? Okay, we know that you go out and section people, but yeah, what else do you do? And it helps with that conversation. Sorry, it's a long answer to a really good question. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Martin. And I see there are no more questions, and I think that's probably very good because it brings us to the right time. There has been a comment raised about the fact that it would be lovely if practitioners or more practitioners attended this conference, and there is actually a conference that really promotes practitioner attendance and research. There are practitioners here, and several of them are from Australia that I know of. But in 2016, and I think it's really good to perhaps mention it in this audience because this conference emanated out of Mount Sinai. There will be the International Conference in Health and Mental Health Social Work in Singapore. And I think Martin might have another announcement to make in that respect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand over to
No, it's all right. You can stay. You can stay. Where was I going to go? There we go. Yeah. Yes, in 2019, so I do urge you to go to Singapore in 2016, but just in case you brought your 2019 diary with you, please block out July and come to York. If you can't wait, then please do tune in on the 5th and 6th of July. If you're interested in cycling, the Tour de France is starting in Yorkshire. Now we've got 9 helicopters that are flying around and taking pictures of the beautiful countryside, and also of York, where the conference will be held. So you can get a sneak preview by tuning in on the 5th and 6th of July to a sports channel. I'm sure that you'll find it. Thank you.
That was wonderful, and thank you, Martin. That was just... This is around the time of closing the conference. I see some people have left already. I expected that. And others are here and looking kind of tired, and I will assume that a lot of that is from being stretched and stimulated and having lots and lots of ideas presented to you. One of the things I'm very grateful about is this would be a natural time to summarize the conference. And one of the things I've learned about putting on a conference is you don't get a chance to attend sessions because there are all kinds of administrative things that you're trying to handle and keep things going. So I haven't been able to attend many sessions, but I understood from Mike Austin that Mike Fisher, who's a member of our organizing committee, loves to summarize conferences and does it extremely well. So we invited Mike to give a summary of our conference, and then I'll make closing remarks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so let me just check, is this microphone working? Are you getting me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. It's very dangerous talking to somebody like Mike Austin, because every time you talk to him, you get a job. Erwin got a much bigger job than I got. And Mike's now flying back to Los Angeles and then on to Hawaii. Hi, Mike. So, a summary. I did originally say you must be joking. It's not possible to give a summary of the entire conference. I'm going to give you some perspectives from the sessions that I attended, which were interesting, fascinating, illuminating, educating. And one of the things I'm going to remind you about is how small we once were. This is the group that met in Salisbury. There are people in the audience here who will be recognizing themselves. Count them. 23. We went on to Helsinki. I don't have a picture of the whole group in Helsinki, although I think Laura has some, and we need them at some point. So I took a picture of 2 of the practitioner researchers, one of whom is here, working at the Matilda Reda Institute. They are Anne-Marie Lindqvist and Ivar Österlind Holmqvist, and some of the Finnish speakers in the audience are wincing at this point in time. But there were about 150 at that conference. So here we are, we have grown. I counted 8 plenaries, 128 papers, 23 posters, unnumberable workshops, special interest groups, 250 people from 19 countries, 28 emerging practice research scholars. I think you have to say you did a good job. It's a good number. Is phenomenal, and we had no idea that it was going to be this big when Mike Austin and I cornered Erwin in a shady corner in Helsinki and said, yeah, New York, how about that? So it's great, here we are. I've had the opportunity to participate in a lot of progressive debates. The whole of the conference is about practice research. I learned something new. And I think we know this, that when we put researchers into a position where they are seen as the leaders of the profession, what it does is it distorts the expertise of practitioners. And that's a problem. That means we're getting not good data. We're getting poor data on the role of practitioners and how they see their job. And I took a very strong message from that the whole issue about equalising the relationship between researchers and practitioners isn't one just about democracy, it's about the quality of the evidence. And the quality of evidence won't be there unless we have a better relationship between research and practice. So I learned a lot from that. A subtext of the conference was the relationship between evidence-based practice or evidence-informed practice and practice research. Constant questions on our mind about whether or not these are polarized positions. We had Bruce Thayer telling us that he was shocked to discover that he was thought of as a proponent only of evidence-based policy and practice. Not only was he shocked, his wife was shocked. And his children were shocked. And I watched this unfolding in some of the sessions throughout the conference. And I found a couple of sessions where people working from a practice research perspective are doing randomized controlled trials. I'm shocked. My wife is shocked. My dog is shocked. So I think we can see that these kind of methodological wars that we have are wars we really need just to get over. We're living in a different world. We're living in a post-evidence-based practice world. And practice research and evidence-based practice need to come together. I've got a lot too, and I've got a lot of people telling me about the fact that the conference is so strongly international, thanks to all the work that you did. And the fact that that creates an enormous degree of diversity. So much diversity that sometimes you're wondering whether or not what you're hearing is practice, is it social work practice, is it research? And that kind of diversity is the kind of diversity we now need to deal with as a practice research movement. We need to find ways of understanding that kind of diversity and embracing the whole range of research that we do that we call practice research. So I've participated in a lot of progressive debates. I've learned a lot. I stayed awake. I had a good time. We came across one very big issue that's always there, and it's always this, isn't it? It's the fact that whatever you do, you need to build structural and agency support for practice research. In terms of structural support, I mean things like, do we actually educate social workers so that they can do practice research? Do we have funding systems that mean that we can do practice research? So many of the presentations I attended started off with somebody saying, we wanted to do this and we couldn't get any money, so we did this. So the structural support needs to be there. The agency support needs to be there. Fascinating stuff in some of the presentations about the fact that merely saying you want to do practice research doesn't create any resources to do it. You have to magic them out of nothing. So there's a very big issue there. And I think there's an issue in academic publishing as well. We need to change the models we use for academic publishing. I think this morning, Lars, you were saying that one of the problems is that we have to publish things for universities, for our friends to read, our family to read sometimes. And that we mustn't convince ourselves that that is actually changing the world. And I remembered this cartoon that I came across. So there's I don't know if it's not legible at the back, it says, yeah, but good luck getting it peer reviewed. So we have good work going on. I think Chaya from Israel was saying about the work that's going on in Israel that isn't published in English. We can't necessarily all see it unless we've got the right languages. So good work is going on, and publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal is just going to be so hard. So we need to move on from that and find other ways of communicating our work. So what's missing, and what sort of things might we be thinking about for the future? This is very selective, and I don't pretend that it's inclusive of everything that everybody's said. But I think certainly these people are probably one of the groups we should think of as missing. These are the people who use social services. These are the people whose outcomes we're trying to improve. And I want to say very clearly that I think we can work in a model of practice research where people who use services are our allies. They're allies to improve the service. They have energy, they have critical roles to play in ensuring that we not only measure the outcomes that matter to services and to governments, but we measure the outcomes that matter to the individuals concerned. I was really interested that Alex Gitterman repeated and reinforced the role of the relationship as a core part of good social work practice. I heard that message, I love that message. What I then, the thing that goes on in my mind then is, whose view of the relationship are we actually trying to take into account? Do we ask the people on the receiving end of the service whether they think the relationship is the kind of relationship that they want? So I think we should be regarding people who use services as our allies, and as our allies in this research conference, as opportunities to work with people who use services. So that's one big thing that I think we could be doing. I think we're still a little bit muddled about the relationship between practice research and practitioner research, and now's not the time. It's late, you know, you've had a hard time to get into definitions, but I think we cannot simply go on saying that all research done by practitioners is practice research, or vice versa. It simply doesn't work. So I think we need to go back to those ideas, and we need to think very carefully about what we mean by research by practitioners, practice-based research, and practice research. And if anybody wants to work on that, I'd be very happy to be part of that. And I think that lastly, we really need to be thinking about what the global framework for our work is. We heard from Timothy this morning about the very different ways in which social work is developing in China. And, you know, my mental note to myself is learn to read Mandarin. because the field that I'm in elder care, that's where the growth is happening at the moment. And we can't live in a world where we expect people to publish in English that we can read. We need to learn Mandarin. So I think we need to think about a global framework for practice research, one which understands better the relationship between different ideas about practice and how practice research differs in that kind of context. And one of the things that I recently learned quite a lot about was the role of social work in social development and environmental sustainability. There's a lot of work going on in developing countries in particular, where social work is changing the way in which we think about social development and changing the way that we think about environmental sustainability. And I hope we won't be sitting by as social workers while the world quietly heats up and we quietly bequeath a very difficult and different future for our children. So I think we need to think about the role of practice research in a very broad range of social work research context, including questions of social development and environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I just need to switch to my presentation and then we'll conclude. Mike was kind enough to sort of volunteer for the job he did, and he did it very well. I'd like to introduce somebody who did not volunteer for the job of dealing with all the stress that I dealt with over the course of the last several months, and it's someone who's a practitioner, and it's my wife Fran who's sitting in the audience. And you don't have to do a PowerPoint, you just stand up and be applauded. She did a great job of it too. So the conference theme was building bridges, not pipelines, and you've heard a good deal about that metaphor, as well as some alternatives to that metaphor. You know about the purposes of the conference, which were broadly to repair and reconceptualize the bridge metaphor that's commonly used to describe practice research integration, to suggest new models of research practice integration that promote two-way traffic between practice and research, between practitioners and researchers, and also between users and practice researchers. To promote international networking and exchange of ideas among practice researchers of all kinds. To identify and support the next generation of practice researchers in social work. By my count, I think we've done that quite well. We've had an array of distinguished international plenary speakers with varied methodological and cultural orientations in dialogue with each other and in Martin's case with himself. A rich international diversity of practice research topics and formats. Active participation of emerging scholars from several countries alongside highly seasoned scholars. And international networking opportunities, and seeing the amount of activity, the amount both in the sessions and outside the sessions, the energy level, the business cards exchanged. It was absolutely thrilling for me to see that happen. There were some unanticipated consequences. I didn't attend very many sessions. I had started by saying I wanted to attend all of them. I knew I couldn't, but I didn't know I was only able to attend so few. But the ones I did were wonderful. Some that I thought might not even work, and they work beautifully. And it's a real testament to you. The sun came out and you used the terrace. A little backstory about that. For about 8 months, we couldn't use the terrace because a window was broken and it was considered unsafe. And just before the conference, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before, just around the time my conference planner quit, so you get some things and you lose some things. Well, what happened was the president of Hunter came and talked to the faculty about what we were doing and said, "How can I help you?" And my dean whispered in my ear, "Tell her to fix the window." And so I told her 3 times over the course of that lunch about the window, and she said, I know, I'm not an elephant, I won't forget." And after that lunch, somebody, maybe the dean, said, "It's never going to happen." And on Monday morning, it happened. And so one of the positive outcomes, which was unanticipated, was the window got fixed, and at the cost of $37,000. So you can understand why there was a question about whether it would happen. And then it rained, and I thought, my God, nobody's going to use the terrace. Well, the sun came out, and some of you used the terrace. I was very pleased. A personal and unanticipated high point was Bruce Thayer came out of the CDM closet. And I'm sorry he's not here. It probably was too stressful for him to deal with. But we're all here to support you one way or the other, Bruce. And soon you'll be so much happier. This is time 2, but I don't have to measure yet. Final nuts and bolts. I want to remind you that there are invitations both from social work and healthcare and research on social work practice to submit papers that you, based on your presentations at the conference. And I really urge you to think about doing so. It would be wonderful to have a couple of special issues based on the conference, but that all depends on your sending papers in. Clearly, these are peer-reviewed journals, and so that you have to think about, well, what is the format of the journal, and how will my paper fit, or will I need to modify it in some way? But I really encourage you to do so. And in a meeting of the organizing committee yesterday, we were also thinking about other possible publication vehicles for and about the conference. A feedback questionnaire. You will be receiving, maybe at 5 o'clock tonight, a very brief and easy to complete feedback questionnaire that you can do online, whether you're on the plane, you know, between movies, whatever. And I'd really appreciate your completing it and sending it back to us. It will be extremely useful in planning the next conference. I want to talk about a case example that I think exemplifies some of the movement in this conference. I opened the conference with a cautionary tale about ball bearings. You may remember that. This is not about ball bearings, but it's about an emerging scholar and somebody who's here today and presented. And this is Herman Low, who was working at the University of Hong Kong with me and is now teaching at the City University of Hong Kong. Is that right? And was a practitioner for many years, did his PhD at the University of Hong Kong, and in the paper that I put in the folder, which reflects in some ways the presentation that I made in Helsinki, I drew heavily on one part of Herman's dissertation, which was a clinical data mining study in which he was able to look at issues of effect size and context using group CBT with depressed and anxious adults in Hong Kong. And the emphasis in that discussion was on the way in which CDM could be used to not necessarily approximate RCTs, but to see to what extent evidence-based interventions that were developed in other countries can be used effectively elsewhere in other cultural contexts. Well, just yesterday, I think it was, I'm having trouble keeping the day straight, on Online First, I was notified that Herman that first paper was published in Social Work and Healthcare, the one based on the CDM portion of his dissertation. But the second portion of the dissertation involved an RCT using a mindfulness intervention because it was clear that from the CDM study that group CBT did not work with everybody. And Herman theorized that maybe a mindfulness intervention would be more effective with those people with whom it didn't work. And I just saw on Online First yesterday that a paper based on his RCT is going to be published very shortly in research on social work, in research on social work practice. So in a way, for me, it's a success story for Herman. Herman, stand up. You don't have to. All right. It's a success story for Herman, but it is for us because it tells the story of this conference and about mixed methods, about bridges, about different journals, and about changing journal environments. And just yesterday or this morning or whenever, Mike Austin told me that he had persuaded the Journal of Evidence-Based Social Work to change its name to the Journal of Evidence-Informed Social Work. And I said, well, is that just a name change? And he said, no, it really does reflect a broadening conception of what evidence-based practice is. And I think that's another indication of not only how things are changing, but how things are changing for the better. Add to that, I want to introduce again Timothy Sim, who has what I think is a very exciting announcement to make. Timothy?
Good afternoon. Well, as some of you have probably already known, that we would like to have the opportunity to organize the next international conference on practice research in Hong Kong. And we hope that it would happen sometime in 2017. And I would like to see that all of you, if not most of you, if not all of you, would be able to join us in Hong Kong. And one of the reasons why we would like to have this in Hong Kong, and I'm very thankful to the committee for agreeing and supporting the idea that we would have this in Hong Kong in 2017, is really, as I've shared this morning, that we'll be able to invite your voices, your perspectives to Asia. So maybe for just an indication and to give us some confidence, how many of you would even think about going to Hong Kong in 3 years? Thank you. Now, after I had some conversation with people in the hallway over tea, and I don't wish that this is just going to happen 3 years later. I think one of the things that I picked up from this conference really is not just about outcome. When we talk about practice research, it's also about the process. And we hope in this coming 3 years, we all would start thinking about what this conference is going to be like. And I would like to give you a challenge to set a goal, as we have already done that, and that's also a very important reason why our Department of Applied Social Sciences in Hong Kong Polytechnic University is willing to take this up, is to set a goal for ourselves to do something in practice research as a department. There are a lot of issues that Mike has very elegantly put together, and there are a lot of issues to think about. And I wonder if you would set a personal goal, or a goal as a department, or a goal even as a region to bring to the next conference. And that in 3 years, you would be able to start thinking about some of the issues that we are currently thinking about. For example, how do we promote or publicize the practices that have gone on that are unknown? And what are some of the ways that you can go about doing it? And how do we build bridges? So it is in this light that I would like to invite you to be connected with me. Please get my card from me. I have enough cards with me. I make sure I got enough. To give me your idea, give me your comments, give me your suggestions about how we will go about building this. I had a wonderful conversation with Keith from Australia, and Marty has come to me and said, Tim, we're in this together. So that's really assuring. And I don't want to just organize an event, but I hope that this can gradually become sort of a movement. One of the things that I am totally impressed about this conference is its intimacy. I'm not sure if you would agree with me, but many agreed that there is this sense of people being connected. And I think there are many, many bridges that have been built. And I love the metaphor, and I think it's very appropriate. And I think I'm a pretty good bridge builder. And I hope I'll be able to build bridges in this coming 3 years, and not suddenly want you to have to walk on water. So let's see what's going to happen. I've started talking with my colleagues in Australia and Singapore, and very soon I would like to be able to get more of your contacts, and also from USA as well. And I hope we're all in this together. It is not just going to be our organizing. We would like to get more supporting organizations so that you will be able to come together as a group. I don't know, I'm just beginning to think about how we'll be having small working groups, for example, to start thinking about working on certain issues so that we'll be able to bring it to the conference. I have prepared a theme, which I have decided not to talk about the theme.
I've thought about a metaphor. I've decided to put it aside because I think it should be a co-construction. It is not going to be determined by us, so I'll wait to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you again in Hong Kong.
So put that on your calendar between Singapore and York. Now I just want to make some final reflections from the bridge, not from the water. I was trying to think about a bridge to extend the bridge metaphor to reflect some of the understandings that have emerged from our discussions in the last 3 days. And it's very clear that we're not talking about separate tracks, as in the Wearmouth Bridge. Is that the way, Martin, is that the way you say it? Wearmouth. In the UK. And we're not talking about a purely gold standard bridge as the Golden Gate in San Francisco. In a way, we're very young, and that became very clear to us this morning when Timothy was presenting about perhaps a neo-Confucian concept of practice research. So it's not as historic as the Brooklyn Bridge. It's not as romantic as the Rialto Bridge in Venice, nor as tragic as the Bridge of Sighs. It's not as elegant as the Sydney Harbour Bridge. By now you know, if you're not from New York, that New York is a city of bridges, and you can see all the different bridges that connect Manhattan to other boroughs and to New Jersey. And it's interesting that in the session that I did attend this afternoon, my dear friend Andrea Savage made reference to the Triborough Bridge. And the Triborough Bridge is probably the bridge that you took to Manhattan from the airport. It's been renamed the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, but taxi drivers will only know that it's the Triborough Bridge because it connects 3 different boroughs, Manhattan, the Bronx, and Queens. It allows two-way traffic in all 3 directions. When I think about this conference and the bridge we've co-constructed together over the past 3 days, that bridge connects the 3 domains of practice, research, and social work education. And it supports two-way traffic of ideas to and from all 3 domains. Some approaches to the Triborough Bridge are elegant and beautiful. Others are purely functional, but taken together, they do the job. Thank you very much. Safe return home. The 3rd International Conference on Practice Research is officially closed.